It has certainly been something to sit and watch this thing play out here in Texas when it comes to the electricity, and the propaganda wing of the state, aka the academics, have been rolled out, of course, to try to utilize this situation as a power grab to say that this is why we need more regulation, more further even centralization of this, because this, of course, once in a blue moon kind of situation that transpired, shows that, of course, we need more regulation and centralization. Now, just for complete transparency, I am out here in Texas. I'm part of this rolling blackout that has been happening for a few days here, and with that meaning that I have power for a little bit, like I have right now, and then I won't, and then I will, and then I won't. That's been the case for a lot of us. Some people have gone without power for an extended period of time, but a lot of us are dealing with this, and I'm right outside of Dallas. And but again, to see the propaganda arm roll this stuff out to act as if this is accredited to, or should be attributed to, this situation should be attributed to deregulation or decentralization efforts, is complete hogwash and nonsense, and it makes absolutely no sense, especially when you consider what the facts are. So let's discuss actually that and what's going on here. Now, look. First and foremost, no, Texas electrical grid, electrical load, and generation is completely privatized. That is not true. That is completely false. Are there private industries and private, obviously, electric companies and so forth? Yes, but however, they're beholden to the wishes and desires of ERCOT, and by extension, the Public Utility Commission of Texas. Not my opinion. That is the absolute fact. You don't have to take my word for anything. Go look it up. In fact, the only reason this centralized body, the fact that this centralized body exists, is the only reason why they're able to do this rolling blackout and demand that the electrical companies do this. Again, this is not my opinion. These are the facts. In fact, we can go to some of these receipts if you would like, just for a quick second. But if I was talking about not only my electrical company, but this is out of Houston, where they're all saying the same thing, of course, because this is indeed true. ERCOT was the one that declared that there was this issue and there was this emergency, and because they have the ultimate authority, they are forced to listen to them. CenterPoint Energy, of course, clarified this. They are required to comply with their directives coming from ERCOT, because they are the ones that dictated it. Yes. So the fact that, yes, there's this big centralized body, which is what you guys love so much, that can absolutely control the entire electrical, ERCOT controls 90% of the electric load, but rather the generation, and they can control it that much where they can dictate every single private industry has to listen to them in the event that they need them to all be on the same page, or they claim that they do. That in itself shows you that this is not a decentralized effort that we're dealing with, or the fact that this is completely privatized, because that's not what it is. Now, who is ERCOT, you might ask? Well, ERCOT, as I mentioned, is more so of it is basically the regulatory wing. And yes, it is, because people, they look at it and they see that it is by legal definition, and a nonprofit corporate entity, which by legal definition it is. But it goes to show, as always with the damn leftists, they have absolutely no idea what that means, or rather what that entails in terms of what a corporation actually is. Just because a corporation is tied to it does not mean that it isn't by extension of an extension of the state. Because when you look at this, for example, when you look at ERCOT, first of all, backtrack, I almost failed to mention, which is kind of the most important news. ERCOT gets all of its policy direction, for the most part, from the Public Utility Commission of Texas. Okay, so again, centralized authority that acts as basically an extension of the state. When you look at the ERCOTs, when you look at their actual board, as an example, don't take my word for anything. You can go look. It's all public information. You look at the board. This moronic idea I saw that some people were peddling, where a lot of the private companies, they're the ones that are running the show there. What? Simply not true. The board of directors almost is exclusively made up of people that worked in public utilities, worked for the government, and some of them aren't even connected to the industry. Some of them are. I'm not going to sit up there and say that, but the vast majority of them aren't, including the chair, Miss Sally Talberg, who doesn't even live in Texas. She lives in freaking Michigan. She also serves in an advisory capacity to the commissioners at the Public Utility Commission of Texas. And they brag about what she had did out there in Michigan, but she has no connection. She's not connected to, let's say, these businesses that you're claiming that they are. This is the actual chair. And I don't think the vice chair as well. I don't think the vice chair lives in Texas as well. So a lot of these people are not affiliated, again, with private businesses. And they are, when you look at guys like Bill Magnus, who is also one of the board members, he as president and the CEO, certainly of ERCOT. And he, again, is a guy that has, for the most part, served within these sort of advisory boards to extensions of the state, whether it be the academics and what have you. Again, not my opinion. You can go look some of this up. Some of these have been directly I'm looking at it right here. Some of these were actually appointed by way of the Public Utility Commission of Texas. Here's Deanne Walker, who was also part of the board. And as you can see, Abbott himself was the one that put it there. Or she was the chair of the Public Utility Commission of Texas. And she's also she's part of the chair, or rather the board, of the of ERCOT. So to act like this is sort of a bunch of private institutions got together and this is basically quasi-monopoly is simply patently false. It is not true. It is not rooted in any sort of truth. But going more so into that, this moronic idea that ERCOT isn't beholden to the federal government is, of course, false as well. What they are saying and what they be correct what they should be saying and what they be correct if they were saying it would be that ERCOT, because it does act as its independent grid in a sense in Texas, it doesn't apply to all of the same rules. But to act like they aren't regulated by way of the federal government is completely false. In fact, before this storm hit the fan, they had to ask the federal government to allow them to do this. As it says right here, ERCOT requests, and this is ERCOT requesting from the federal government that Secretary issue an order immediately effective February 14th, again, right before all of this went down, through February 19th, which is in 2 days from now, authorizing the provision of additional energy from all generation units subject to emissions or other permit limits. In the ERCOT region, the generating units specify resources that the order pertains are listed on the order, blah, 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 blah. So basically, in order to use their own freaking energy, additional energy that they wanted to be able to utilize because of these governmental regulations, particularly with the environment, they had to ask the state and get freaking, when I say the state, I mean the federal government in its capacity. They had to ask them for freaking permission to do it. So it's not like they are completely deregulated in a sense, or completely like detached from the federal government. That is simply not true. So we got the facts out of the way when it comes to ERCOT, which a lot of people believe fumbled this whole entire situation, which, yes, very well may be true. But to sit here and act like that is some sort of private institution because this corporate entity attached to it isn't even rooted in what is true. And also, when it comes to that corporation, which is what they say, well, it's a corporation, therefore it's not regulated or something like that, is some bull crap that they throw out there. The Southwest Power Pool, which is very similar to ERCOT and in a lot of similarities when it comes to this, but they answer more to the feds, right? But the Southwest Power Pool also is deemed as a corporation, a nonprofit corporation. It's the same thing. But of course, they completely ignore that. And they also had some rolling blackouts in 14 states, which they had mentioned. It was to this degree, probably not, but they did have rolling blackouts because what they said that this was unprecedented time and that they had never had to do this. It's almost like because this is a unique situation that has something to do with what happened. But let's talk about that in terms of what happened. Again, ERCOT dictates what had to happen, and according to them, and also this is sourced by the EIA, but they of course getting their information from the ERCOT, if you will. And you can see here that there's been one energy source, one energy source that remained consistent through this, basically this entire time. It had a slight dip, but it was the most consistent, and that was nuclear, which a lot of these green environmentalists demonize, or rather refuse to utilize. They say that people like myself are against renewable energy. No, I don't know anybody that's certainly against nuclear that's on my side of this. But all you're looking at here is what portion of, like you see, natural gas obviously makes up a lot of it, coal as well. And you can see right kind of before this sort of went down. I mean, hell, the wind thing was almost non-existent for a little bit there. But natural gas attributes to certainly most of the megawatt hours, if you will. And that's generally the setup. Now, Texas, for those of you that don't know, have been bragging about their wind generation and all of that. I mean, really being one of the world's leaders there in that regard. Now, if they failed, whether some of them got frozen, and which is, yes, that is absolutely what happened. And there seems to be some hiccups there as well with the gas and coal as well. That kind of derailed either the production or the transport in some capacity because of this very unique weather that we're having here. And now what they would say is that, well, we warned them that they just weren't winterized. Well, the same thing could be said about the natural gas or anything like that, because yes, in colder spots throughout not only the U.S. but throughout the world, they are allowed to, even in colder situations, they are allowed to remain productive. It's almost because they prepare for that. So you can't use that argument to say, well, they work, or we have the windmills or what have you, then they get frozen. But if we just winterize them, which is the term they're using, then we wouldn't have had to worry about that. Well, the same thing can be said about the other forms of energy. That's not even an argument. But when you consider Texas's plans, yes, they're placing a lot of emphasis on this, less on nuclear, less on, of course, natural gas and coal, but they are placing a lot of emphasis on wind and solar. Again, this is something that they brag about, and this isn't a part of their plans, and it's one of the heavy subsidized industries right now, both at the federal level and even and when it comes to Texas. In terms of who they subsidize them. So we don't even have a freer market in this regard to see who would come out and who would be more reliable and who would do what it needed to, what needed to happen in order to ensure that something like this either does not happen, which would be nearly impossible, but in order to ensure that it doesn't happen, let's say limit that. If we had a completely privatized, let's say, form, but that's not what we have. The government, the Texas government, is absolutely been subsidizing wind and solar, and they're still doing it by using your taxpayer dollars. This isn't my opinion. Now, I'm not saying that hasn't happened with natural gas and coal, but absolutely going forward, no. Most of the emphasis has been placed certainly on these wind turbines. This is what they've been doing. This isn't my opinion. Don't take my word for anything that I'm saying and go look it up. So what seems to be the case is that the weather was an unprecedented situation, and the weather had impacted what we have going on right now. Like I said, this is the first time that I've ever experienced it. I've lived in Texas for 29 years. That's my mother about this. Like, no, I don't remember. Of course, we've had outages, but nothing obviously to this degree. But to sit up here and blame this on private institution is complete nonsense. Again, the only reason these rolling blackouts can even occur is because of the centralized authority in ERCOT, as well as the Public Utility Commission of Texas, which, again, they direct ERCOT. I get it. Centralization is what you guys love. There's never been a problem that a leftist can look at and say, we need to throw more money at it. We need to regulate it more, and they think that will be the absolute solution. That does not mean it's true. There's a lot of inconvenient facts that they seem to want to leave out here when it comes to this. Now, I get it. When the information first came out, and you consider what it's like 10-20% of this energy was through wind turbines, and I believe and solar, if I'm not mistaken. So when you saw that they were frozen, a lot of people alluded to this idea. Well, that's what happens with this, and yeah, but then that is true. And we did come to find out that also with some of the other forms of energy, they had some issues as well. But if you're going to use the argument that, well, they weren't winterized, you'd have to use the same exact argument for the other forms of energy. And this is why some people that were more into coal, natural gas, and nuclear instead of wind and solar, and those panels also freezing over, and obviously you're not getting energy from them. The advocates of them, of those forms of energy, when it be natural gas, coal, nuclear, they were saying, and they had been saying, that the market had been muddied in Texas when it came to how they subsidize the wind and solar as of recently, right? And it does not incentivize them, because they're undercut, and incentivize them to come up with the most creative and effective ways to produce energy, which is absolutely true. We see this all across the world when it comes to governments, and governments muddy up the market because they're able to heavily subsidize a particular side of the market, which neglects another. That happens all the time in virtually every industry across the entire nation, as well as the entire world, where the market isn't completely free and you have it distorted. Yes, you have private actors within it, but it's this quasi sort of fascism. It's almost like you guys were using the term fascism incorrectly. But it's this quasi sort of fascism going on, where they get all their direction by way of the state, and the state also has its role in actually subsidizing certain industries. But what it ultimately boils down to when it comes to this situation is this was an unprecedented situation. Even the Southwest Power Pool, when they did their rolling blackouts in 14 states, it's the same thing that they were saying, like, we've not seen anything like this. When it gets below zero in Texas, that's not a thing that happens out here all the time. So I can totally understand why someone would throw $1 billion at winterizing something, because we've had cold winters in which we never had this problem, but winterizing it to the degree that you're throwing so much money to as a fail-safe for something that may happen once every freaking 100 years. Well, you have a winter storm, something like this that happened. Since I've been alive, I've never seen anything like this. So, but you do have a distorted market, and I would argue that that's the solution. ERCOT should be abolished. The Public Utilities Commission of Texas should absolutely be abolished, and it should be completely left to the market when it comes to the production, rather the electrical load, when they decide to disperse it, or who is making sure it's all balanced, which is what ERCOT essentially does. There should be no central authority that is able to dictate how exactly that is going to go down. Okay, period. So hopefully people learn from that. But I had to get the facts out there and give you more so my theory in terms of what's going on. I know you guys are so itching to blame deregulation, but that's simply not rooted in truth, period. Simply not. And the last thing that I want to say on this is this idea that just because these people have R's next to their name, or we live in Texas, means that it's more so deregulation at play or decentralization at play is complete nonsense. And you're seeing why folks like myself have said that just because they have an R next to their name does not mean they're some sort of advocate for freer markets. Greg Abbott is absolutely a welfare statist, and he is, if anything, should have showed you throughout COVID-19 that he absolutely will utilize definitely taxpayer dollars, but certainly his authority to do authoritarian leftist bullcrap. You guys are just now finding out because all you're ruled by is the fact, well, this person has a D next to their name or an R next to their name. And because Texas is Texas and Texas is red, they say, though not the entire state is, Texas is red. Therefore, there's no this has to be at play, deregulation and all those sorts of things. You're starting to learn what's going on here. For those of you that have been paying attention, this isn't news, but there's a lot of people that are stupid enough to believe that just because someone has an R next to their name, then that means that they can't be a leftist. Well, that's nonsense.